everyone to our last session of the Cool Folklor's Archival Conference. My name is Rene Georgopalis, and I guess I get to wear a couple of hats today. I have the pleasure of working with advancement for the Faculty of Arts, and so I have daily dealings with the Cool Folklore Center and helping them to generate funding from donors from all across the country and elsewhere. As well as in my volunteer life, I am the second vice president of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. And lots of organizations we work with and spend time with. Many of you do such great work in gathering and preserving and also highlighting and showcasing new ways of our utilizing and expressing and sharing our cultural identity. So with that, we'll start by introducing our first speaker, Rene Georgopalis. He's been the Executive Director of the Archives and Archives Advisor at the Archives Society of Alberta since 2012. She has worked with archives at Hladyshevsky Museum in St. Albert, Maternity Home in Toronto, as well as the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives in Toronto. She holds a BA in Women's Studies from 2002 and an MA in Classics from 2007 from the University of Alberta, and Master's in Archives and Records Management from University of Toronto. Her interests in archives include the topics of social justice and description. Today she is sharing with us a little bit about the Archives Society of Alberta, how they offer a number of services to support archival institutions as well as archivists. These services include advising, grant programs, and professional development opportunities. The ASA is one of the Canadian Councils for Archives, and a similar council exists in each province and territory. This talk will outline the services ASA offers, as well as the various councils in Canada. Rene.
Can I stand? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Up there. Okay. Thanks, Maryna. Okay, you can hear me? Great. I had a little up. I'll just talk closer. I had a little font problem that I forgot about when I rushed over here today. So I think it's just the first slide that's a little off. And oh, this is interesting. Okay, perfect. All right, so I'll just give you a short overview of what I'll speak about today. So first I'll talk to you a little bit about the Canadian Council of Archives. Then I'll talk about the organization where I work, which is the Archives Society of Alberta. And then I will discuss the other archival councils in Canada. And then I guess the questions are at the end. So yeah, before going into individual councils and what we do, I thought it was important to talk about the Canadian Council of Archives. They're like a national professional development type organization for our archives. And I just thought I'd share with you their mandate here. So it's to preserve and provide access to Canadian documentary heritage by improving the administration, effectiveness, and efficiency of the Canadian archival system. So they do this in a variety of ways. They are the representative of Canadian archival institutions. So they're not a professional association for individual archivists, but more for institutions. They are the body that's responsible for archival standards. So I don't know if you've heard of rules for archival description, but they are the organization that created that standard. So they have a lot of committees who work on improving archival standards. Currently, they are working on creating a new accession standard. Currently, archives do not have an accession standard. They've also been revamping the National Archival Appraisal Board. And if you haven't heard of that, that's for monetary appraisal of archives. So they do, a lot of that national standardization, which trickles down to the entire nation. So it's quite different from museums that don't have one national body that standardizes everything. And you can find all of their standards as well as other resources on their website. So Rules for Archival Description is a free download on their website. They also have other information that you'll find there, such as conservation and preservation guides, a guide for prioritizing what you should digitize in your archival holdings. So you may want to check out those free resources. And then every few months they offer some webinars for a cost. They're just short workshops on the telephone. And they cover topics such as copyright or preservation. And those are typically posted on the archives listservs. So there's 2 listservs out there. I don't know if they've been discussed yet or not. But one is called ArcanL, and the other, like the provincial one here in Alberta, is ASAL. And it's just a place where various archival workshops are posted. If you want more information, feel free to ask me after the session. They also administer Young Canada Works grants. So those are grants for students or recent graduates to provide, an extra staff person at your archives to do some sort of archival project. Recently, they've started what is called ACDPS, so Archives Canada and Digital Preservation Services. So this is a neat little package that you can purchase. I think it's a monthly fee. And if you have digital preservation concerns, so those are for born digital records or digitized material, and you don't know how to preserve it, they have different packages that you could look into. So it's kind of nice because it's already set up and good to go. So it's the infrastructure for digital preservation. And they have a database, and I'll be talking a bit about the different councils and their databases, but basically all the archival descriptions and digital objects, so pictures, textual records, can be uploaded to their database and viewed. So that can be handy, especially if there's an individual person who's done a lot of important work across the country. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about the Archives Advisors Working Group. They administer a meeting for us Archives Advisor, which I am one of, every month, where we just kind of get advice from each other and update ourselves on what's happening in the Canadian environment. So I'll talk a little bit about the Archives Society of Alberta, but first, so Andrea mentioned every archives or every province and territory has an archives council. So that's a professional association that supports the work of archivists and archival institutions. So I work for the council for Alberta called the Archives Society of Alberta. And so this is our mandate. We provide the tools and resources necessary to preserve Alberta's documentary heritage. So what kind of work do we do? We have 2 types of membership, but some of the services we offer aren't just for members. We do have workshops. So through our education program, we provide a 6-day intensive introduction to the archival profession course every year, usually in April or May. And so it's available for anybody who wishes to take it. You don't have to be a member, but if you are a member, there is a discount. And same with our more advanced workshops. So we offer 2 additional workshops approximately every year. And those can be on a variety of topics depending on the needs coming out of our members in the community. And again, you get a discount if you're an institutional or an individual member. And it's also a nice place to network, so to meet other people working in archives and see what they're doing and get new ideas. And we do offer a conference once every 2 years as well. So that's another opportunity to network and learn about what's going on in the community. And for individual members, we do offer some assistance for professional development. So we have professional development travel assistance. And for an individual member, they can get funded up to a maximum of $750 per year to go to, say, a workshop or a conference or something like this. And we offer education assistance as well. So if you're taking, say, the Archives Institute, that 6-day intensive course, and you live in Alberta and you're an individual member, you can get some support if you have had to travel to attend that. We also offer bursaries for Alberta residents who wish to pursue archival studies so that we can support bringing in that knowledge into the province. We don't have an archival program in Alberta, so sometimes it's a little challenging for us to find archivists to hire within the province, so this is a way that we can support that. And then we have institutional membership as well. So there is criteria in order to become an institutional member. We need to see that your archival institution has a mandate, so a commitment to supporting an archives. We also want to see some policies. So do you know what you're acquiring? Like, what's the scope of your acquisition for your holdings? Who can see your archives and that sort of thing. We want some adherence to archival standards. So there's standards for various steps of the archival process, which are listed there, and an ongoing budget. So we need to see those things in, and then it goes through me and another member, and we review those, and then once you get approved, then there are various services we provide for those folks. So there's project grants, and we offer those annually, and it's to support, usually it's for just processing some archives in your holdings and making those available. But it can change from year to year. And so it's nice to just get a little bit of financial support in order to get the work done you need to get done. We also offer a database called Alberta on Record. And that database, you can put your archival descriptions up there. So if you don't have an archival database, it can be a really nice, easy system that's already set up that you can use. We have a loan program, so you can borrow scanners and books and various other things. They're all listed on our website. And then there's other benefits depending on how our funding goes. So on occasion, we will get additional funding from the government, and we'll put on extra programs. So we had a flood advisory program from 2014 to 16. And we ensured that all of our institutional members were ready for disasters. So we spent a lot of time doing a lot of disaster planning and buying people various equipment they needed in order to make sure that we're ready for anything, like fireproof cabinets and whatnot. So it just kind of depends on what other funding comes down. We offer other services. So there's advising, and I am an archives advisor, which I think you've heard. So that means you can contact me and ask me any questions about the profession you want. I advise students. I advise people with no knowledge of archives. Like, it doesn't really matter. I also do site visits if you need one. You can also, if you're an ASA member, you can participate in the society. So that means you can help frame the direction of what we're doing. We do have various ways of communicating, like a newsletter and a blog and that thing, so you can join that. And we provide outreach initiatives. So every first week of October, we have Archives Week, and we like to have a launch so that we can highlight various archives. And then there's sponsorship as well. So if if you're doing some sort of archives event, you can always write my board a letter, and they may fund it if there's money available. Okay, and just about the other archival councils, I gave you that handout to highlight what services are available at various provinces and territories. So ASA is one of the better funded councils, and I would say most other councils probably provide a little bit less, or it's structured differently. So advising changes in different locations. For instance, in BC, they have an advisor, but she doesn't do site visits because they don't have funding for that. So she just will answer questions over the phone. Some places don't have advisors at all. So everything varies a little, and the funding varies. So some places have absolutely no grants, and you can just see it out there in those handouts. So, and I think questions for the end, but yeah, okay. Thank you.
Next, it is my pleasure to introduce someone who is an exceptional leader and an inspiration in our community for all the things that he does personally in his volunteer, professionally, his advice that he gives to many of us. Hladyshevsky. He's a lawyer with partner with Denton's and president of the Shevchenko Foundation. And he's come to us to talk today a little bit about the Shevchenko Foundation, specifically all of the work that they do. And yeah, you know what? I'm just going to let him tell you about it.
Дякую. Христос Воскрес, Jesus Воскрес, for those that are still celebrating, Slava Jesus Christus, Slava Navika, for all those otherwise. And for anybody else, I'm a proud Christian, so if I've offended you, I apologize for that, but I happen to be one. It's Sunday morning, it's a Den Materi. It's interesting, 19 years ago today, I stood on the stages of the Chairman of the Symphony Orchestra, and at the newly minted Winspear Center, one of our musicians had passed away that weekend, Mother's Day weekend. And I had the privilege of being able to stand in front of kind of a full house, and then at the end of a rather somber occasion, I explained that 2 days prior, my wife Daria had given birth to Roman, and she had come home the night before, and it was Mother's Day, and so I sort of left her in bed with Roman to do to basically do the greetings for the symphony. 19 years later, I left Daria. She's still in bed with a mimosa, and with a 6'1" Roman giving her a big hug on Mother's Day. And so we all had unbelievable mothers in our lifetime. And for me, International Women's Day existed way when I was doing Mother's Day concerts in various church basements. This Mother's Day was the International Women's Day and was recognized as such. Yeah, my presentation is where on the screen here? I'm just going to go to it. Is it here or here?
Heritage Progress.
There we go. Dякую.
And you don't have to make it full screen. Just go here.
Yeah. That's good. All right. Huh. This is great. Shevchenko Foundation. How do I turn this back? Now, let me just go back here. There we go. Leadership, stewardship, partnership. That's who we are. To be a credible person in the community, you have to be a leader. To be a leader, you have to take chances. To be leaders, you sometimes have to do things that are unpopular for people. That's what leaders do, and they ride with their passions. And I'm fortunate to be part of an organization that has been doing that for over 50 years. Stewardship is people got to be able to trust you. You got to be able to hold their money over several lifetimes. You have to be able to deliver on what you say. You have to be able to explain to people that, again, there is a long-term plan and that the sustainability of the community is there. Partnership means you have to be creative and get out into the community. get your tentacles where people are so that you can be of some service or usefulness to the community. In 5 minutes or less, I'm going to quickly go through the establishment of the foundation back in 1963. I actually looked at the Hansard. It was a $30,000 balance left after a bunch of banquets celebrating the installation of the Shevchenko Monument in Winnipeg, and that $30,000 wasn't spent on more banquets. There were actually some people of vision who said you should probably put that away and start giving grants in the hundreds of dollars soon to scholars to do things like translate the works of Shevchenko into English and other similar things. It's obviously been a long ride. Those of you that don't know the foundation need to understand that it's a philanthropic and a chartered institution dedicated to the preservation, that's where you people sort of come in, promotion, you people also come in there, and development of the Ukrainian-Canadian cultural heritage, and to the advancement of a flourishing Ukrainian community for the enrichment of Canada. That's important. We're a Canadian foundation. We're not a Ukrainian foundation. There are Ukrainian foundations in Kyiv and Lviv. We're a Canadian foundation. It's important to Canadians this foundation exists and flourishes for the enrichment of Canada by providing leadership in building and sustaining a permanent endowment fund. Obviously, you're part of the people that sometimes come to the foundation for grants, and you're there on behalf of institutions. But clearly, we want to strengthen the character of our Canadian-Ukrainian identity, and when I get to the end of this, we'll talk a little bit about the heritage pillar. There are 4 pillars in the Shevchenko. How about if I do cognitive dissonance? There are 4 pillars. My Psychology 201 prof would be very impressed. I remember that. We have an arts pillar. We have a community development pillar, we have an education pillar, and we have a heritage pillar. The arts pillar, obviously, a fundamental aspect of expressing our own unique cultural identity is through our arts granting program. A good amount of people in our community who are 40 years and younger are in these programs. They're in the dance programs, they're in the literary arts programs, they're in the media arts, music, theater, and visual arts. A good part of the future of your community is right there. So the foundation obviously has a major focus. Stubbornness of one particular president, we created something called the Kobzar Literary Award in order to foster, if you will, engender more writing about us and our histories here in Canada for the benefit of all. I was at the Volya Vesna thing last night, I should say till early this morning, and I had a chance to see some wonderful, wonderful artists perform. I spent 7 hours yesterday, my throat feels it, with 8 members of the Ukrainian Banderas Chorus as we did our Western Canadian Filia rehearsal. So it meant not having to catch the red eye to Cleveland. It allowed me to do that here and come here. So we have people everywhere performing and getting interested in things Ukrainian through the arts. Very, very important. I can't underestimate how the majority of our people who aren't necessarily Ukrainophiles or have parents who are fluently bilingual come into the Ukrainian community via this route. We also have an educational program. We have a leaders fund. We are trying to help the youngest in our community to succeed by providing bursaries and scholarships. Ashley was here fresh from the SUSK conference in Banff. It's interesting that the foundation has partnered with SUSK, and we now have an endowment within SUSK that people can then donate for the purpose of sustaining SUSK. There were a lot of wild and crazy people in this room who were in SUSK. They're so old now that someone actually has to recount to them what they did because they are no longer capable of remembering exactly what they did. But I warn anybody who ever went to a SUSK party, the negatives are all there, and they'll be returned upon a suitable donation to the SUSK endowment that will sustain SUSK. I had the privilege in an 8-hour travel day of getting out to their conference in Banff last Friday, and it was a wonderful experience to see a couple hundred people who are the future of your community engaged, aware, intellectually savvy, social media savvy, that are chomping at the bit to lead your community and lead themselves in their lives. So that was just a wonderful experience for me. In addition to providing scholarships and bursaries, we are moving as many students as we can every year on bursary programs to allow them to study in Ukraine. I got my hand out to a lot of other folks thinking that there should be a birthright of every Ukrainian Canadian to be able to go to Ukraine while they're students and be able to get immersed there and come back, and we're maybe slowly getting on the road. We've also partnered with MyTax. We are bringing in from Ukraine this year in excess of 60 Ukrainian university students in partnership with IBM, the Government of Canada, and Shevchenko Foundation in funding Ukrainian university students to come here, but they're also going to be tagged into SUSK, members of our university community, to create that connection. It's not the old foundation maybe that you once knew. Community development. Well, the SUSK National Convention is something we like to fund. This particular 3-day meeting you're holding here is something that we like to get involved in. We understand that the different community festivals are extremely important to the communities. We're trying to create one here in Edmonton with UFest later on this month, but I can tell you, for anybody that's been to the Bloor Festival or the new, relatively new Ottawa Capital Festival or the one in Calgary, wherever these festivals originate, there is a remarkable attendance of people we never knew existed. It's an interesting thing here. The almost 1 million people in Western Canada that identify themselves as Ukrainian Canadian. There's another about 400 to 500,000 west of the Manitoba border, but there's over 1 million that self-identify in Western Canada as Ukrainian Canadian. We're part of the fabric. We're part of the culture. When I phone law firms in Western Canada, nobody ever mispronounces my name, right? Because we're part of the fabric here. I don't have the same experience when I phone Montreal or mostly Toronto or Hamilton or something like that. It's sort of like, okay, and if it's the United States, it's a killer. Let's talk about Heritage Grants, the Heritage Program. And we sort of get involved in 4 aspects. This is in your area. One is the acquisitions area. And in this case, and you can download the PowerPoint later, only organizations can apply for funding for acquisitions, right? The application has to specifically include what is being acquired and the value of the artifact. But there are such artifacts in collections that we assist with. Exhibits and related programs would be something that you probably would be more familiar with, where individuals and organizations apply for funding. It also deals with travel, equipment, facility, rental accommodations, promotional costs, professional fees related to touring exhibits. My dream is eventually to have a well-funded heritage program that allows Ukrainian exhibit tours to go across the country, being curated in different cities and then shared with other cities. And again, if you get onto our website, you'll see that. The history of Ukrainians in Canada, again, research, writing, publication of histories, local community histories, goes right down to parishes, cultural ensembles, and recording oral histories. We have, if you think about it, that we have hundreds of millions of years of experience in Canada, given the number of people that came here and everything that they experienced. It's in hundreds of millions of years, in those 100 years with those millions of people that have shared that. Somehow we have to capture it all, but we have to be selective. Collections management for heritage institutions, again, this is primarily based for organizations that are trying to maintain their digital archives or move to digital archives and move to that. How much time do I got left?
3 minutes.
3 minutes. These areas are pretty important to me in the sense of what we do. We have funded some recent projects. I know the Sanctuary Project is presenting. There was a recent video and photographic project on the reflections of Ukrainian churches in Saskatchewan that was funded. This was the building of, I think it's the monument dedicated to William Kudelik that's in process. These are the PLOS students. It's a wonderful thing that we have places to take people, PLOS, SUM, UNO, and other organizations. The PLOS people were interested because they asked for some money for heritage, and they said, "Okay, you get off the plane in Edmonton before you point those buses west, and get out into the mountains, go east." So they did. They got off on buses in mosquito-ridden area of eastern Alberta. Immediately were taken into a tent where they were interviewed by an officer and a former RCMP officer, is who they were, where they came from, do they have any identification, what is their intention in coming here, what did their family. It was actually quite an interesting experience for these kids to experience a little bit of what the original immigrants had. So they were actually put through, they were asked to report back to the officer periodically during that part of the tabia. So it was an interesting way of immersing people in the physical environment. You're going out to the Heritage Village, so obviously you're going to see a little bit of that there. This is a monument, I think, a dedication to Ukrainian pioneer women in Dauphin. And so these things exist across the country. You know, it's important. This is very important. And for those of you, as I explained to university students, you can get onto the Shevchenko Foundation website, www.shevchenkofoundation.ca. It's on my phone. Go to the website and paste it into your phone. And that way, as I explained to the university students, if you don't have that, I don't really think you're Ukrainian, because I don't think you really care. Go there. There's lots of information there. Lots of information on how to donate there. There's lots of information about the people around you. This stuff is very important to me. You know, my father, when he got off the boat and had to work off his passage at the end of the Second World War, found out that there was this Ukrainian community here, and he didn't understand what it was. So starting in the 1950s, he went to the oldest archives of the Calgary Herald and asked to have access to his archives. For the next 10 years, my father on weekends used to record every story there was about Galicians, Bukovinians, whatever, that tied into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He hand wrote those. I still have his handwritten notes. And in there, as he heard the mysterious thing, he heard on the prairies that there was something called internment. He didn't understand what that was, because in Ukraine they didn't understand what that was. And he basically then created an entire sheaf of archival materials for himself on the internment stories starting about 1914 to 1920. 50 years later, his son goes through university, begins to understand something about Ukrainian internment, and now has an access to an archive on a Selectric typewriter that he plunked away at in the 1960s, 2 fingers at a time. He typed out all of his notes for me. Not for me, just for doing it. He didn't know that, the Smarkach, didn't know the Smarkach would amount to anything, right? So the Smarkach sort of did, and used that and showed these archives to 3 different Canadian prime ministers, 7 Canadian heritage ministers, 14 different directors general of the government, while we had a 20-year redress campaign that eventually had $10 million allocated in a permanent endowment in the Shevchenko Foundation on internment. Why is that important too? Well, it just so happens that some of the money from that internment money was put to a young student of archaeology in British Columbia who wanted to study the Morrissey campsite. And with the assistance of money and archival material and ground penetrating radar, she found the escape tunnel in Morrissey in the middle of the woods. And in that escape tunnel, when we took out the archaeological information, is a little shovel and a very small barbed wire cross that was left in the escape tunnel. And that barbed wire cross now sits in the new Canadian Museum of History in the new wing. And all of this because we preserved our heritage. We did the right things when we had to, and we allowed our youth to access it, and we allowed it to be a living, breathing thing that now, in perhaps one of the most prestigious museums in the country, tells a piece of our story. That's my story.
Thank you. Lydia Migus is the chair of the UCC National Committee. It is the committee that is entitled Museums, Archives, and Research Institutions Network. She has been and continues to be active within the Ukrainian community, working with various organizations over the years, She currently is with Ukrainian Catholic Women's League, the Edmonton Eparchy, Friends of the Ukrainian Village Society, Friends of the Cool Folklore Center, and has extensive experience working both in business and not-for-profit sectors. At the last Triennial Congress in Regina in 2016, after a discussion about the loss of culture and heritage artifacts and the lack of knowledge of what to do about the archives of our aging population, it was determined that a permanent committee be established to oversee the creation and continued operation of a consortium, or cooperative network, of institutions within a Ukrainian and Ukrainian-Canadian themed mandate, with particular reference to museums, archives, and research institutions, to ensure that the ethno-history of Ukrainian-Canadian community is accurately and respectfully presented. Reaching out to various community institutions is a daunting task, especially when you're trying to do it from across the country. And having this forum at the conference is a very unique way of informing and launching this network. Discussion with participants about what is the network trying to accomplish, what its role is, and how to proceed to the betterment of the Ukrainian community and the preservation of our heritage in a united approach. Прошу, Lydia.
Дякую. Well, Христос Воскрес, Слава Ісусу Христу, and happy Mother's Day to all of those mothers. You preempted me, what can I say? So the idea was to talk about support networks. As Andrea had stated at the conference, at the triannual meeting of the UCC, which is an umbrella organization, there was discussion of what's happening with the stuff in Baba's basement when it's ending up in thrift shops and whatnot. What's happening with the archives, the boxes of stuff in the basement? Is it being shredded? Is it being done? What's being done with it? And how is it being lost? So at the end of these conversations, it was resolved to create this committee. And it was great because we wanted to preserve our heritage memories, and they're fragmented. We've got UCRDC, we've got Oseredok, we've got the Cool Center, we have CIUS, and how are we going to pull this all together? And we're still working on that. So as we said, it was created the Museums, Archives, and Research Institute Network, or Zvezok. It's a concept, but the idea is how can we be proactive? Where can we go from here? And who wants this stuff? Who cares, and how are we going to preserve it? How can we get the resurgence of our ancestry, our cultural heritage, and our history? There's a change in demographics out there. We're all getting older, and what's the youth doing? We're downsizing, we're getting rid of stuff. Where is it going? And how can we utilize what's out there and not just leave it in someone's basement, leave it in individual institutions? How can we share this? So yesterday we had talked about what to do, and there were ideas that Ashley came up with. There are ideas that Larissa spoke about as well. So we had to come up with some goals for this committee as well prior to this. And we had a few meetings with Sofika in Oseredok. We had talked with Maryna and Rene Georgopalis, who was with archives. We've talked with Radomir, who was a historian and stuff. And we were reaching out to various other organizations. But we had to come up with some guidelines and some rules and goals. So the idea was that it would be open to individuals, groups, and representatives of museums, archives, and research institutions who have Ukrainian or Ukrainian-themed content. And the goals would be to provide a forum for exchange of ideas, similar to this one. So when we talked, and Maryna and Irina said that they were working on this conference, what a wonderful way to start to launch the grassroots of working towards this committee. So we wanted to work together rather than just duplicating stuff, so we can share ideas. There are a lot of institutions that share ideas and projects and stuff, but what about the individuals? What about the grassroots? What about the mom and pop organizations? The library in Calgary, say, who does have archives but doesn't quite know what to do with them or how to proceed with them. It's great that researchers can reach out and find them, but there's other people who need to be sharing that information as well. The fostering of community partnerships and sharing resources. The working together instead of duplicating the same projects. Having a project here in Alberta, having a similar project in Saskatchewan. If we can partnership together and share those resources and have a cohesive bigger project, or even having individual projects that we can then share and then can travel as exhibits as well. As I said, not that it hasn't happened with bigger institutions, but the smaller ones, the smaller museums and whatnot. To provide areas of support for collection management, artifact care, handling, exhibits, administration, and whatnot. It working towards creating a repository of what we have out there and where can we find it, who has duplicates of materials and who needs them, how can we share that. Have a central website and database. This is a huge project, and we need, obviously, there needs to be some cohesiveness and pulling all this together. Now, the idea is, how do we do all this? And we'll get to that later. To promote and facilitate the enhancement of procedures, practices, utilizing professional standards, conduct based on the prevailing mainstream approaches and methodologies. That sounds like really serious stuff. But it's basically taking the people who know, the volunteers, the Mirons who have the experience, the Pani Nadias, the Pani Iridas, the Alexandras, the Irinas, the Marynas, and taking the institutional knowledge that's out there and putting it together so that we can all utilize it. We know where to find it, as opposed to spending time and searching individually, to having kind of a main-based best practices, so that we can be proactive and to help assist in the construction of succession planning, helping volunteers and semi-professionals and professional staffs work together to try and get the youth engaged. It's great that we have at institutions and universities, we have youth, but in the little communities out there, it's a lot of volunteers, and it's retired volunteers working on this. How do we get the youth engaged? How do we educate them? And of course, to assist with municipal, provincial, and federal coordination to acquire project-based operational capital funding while avoiding redundancy and unnecessary competition. What do we mean by that? Everyone's sitting there going, "Nam treba hroshi." And sometimes when you find that there's similar projects asking for the same money from the same pot, you're in competition with the left hand and the right hand. So how can we work together? How can we communicate? How can we better understand what we're all doing and help each other utilize that pot of money and increase it as well? Yes, there's money with Shochenko, there's federal grant money. How can we combine the two and get a better product in the end? How can we have, I heard there was talk about there's certain courses that we can take, not cheap courses, but there are other granting opportunities that if we can combine them, that we can actually cut the course costs by a third for them, or by even more. So it happens here in Alberta, what's available in Ontario. Can we cross-reference those somehow? Can bring the Eastern people here for courses and exchange it as well, utilizing funds here and funds there, so that we get a bigger bang for our buck. And to educate the public about the value of Ukrainian-themed museums, archives for the purpose of preserving our Ukrainian-Canadian heritage. Miron spoke about educating the need for institutions to realize the value of multicultural archives in Canadian history. Andrei spoke today about getting stuff into the Canadian Museum of Civilization, or of History now that it's called, as it's changed recently. How do we do that as a community, as a large community? We have the big institutions doing it, but how can we filter that down so that we're all working on utilizing that instead of working in our own little pockets, having URDC here, having Shevchenko Foundation there, having Cook there. How do we bring it all together? These are big questions, and we don't have all the answers. And of course, we've got our institutions who are doing great work and have connections and whatnot, but how do we enhance the volunteer component for our museum and archives and research communities? How do we support them? And that was the concept of what this committee was to start. So of course we had this wonderful session 2 years ago, and then it's like, okay, done, now mstice biholovo. Now what do we do? So how do we start reaching out to the grassroots people? How do we get out there? This conference being the first. It's great. How do we create that network? Ashley suggested that we all share our emails and we all have a representative on this network committee, and that we can meet frequently, discuss these issues, and then make plans of how to move forward. That's wonderful too. And how do we see that moving forward? We've got the UCC National already has a website present. There are web people working on that. We can utilize those, the facilities that we have, the talents that we have, and bring more together and make it successful that way. We have a secure membership login area where so those that there are privacy issues, we can utilize it that way. How do we put all their information out there to share what we have exhibit-wise, so that what we are producing here in Alberta or what's being produced in Ontario with the Holodomor, how can it travel from one extent to the other? How can all the little festivals, other than the big ones, have access to that stuff? Where can they find all this stuff? So my questions to you is, having started this, where do we go from here, and how do we now take the next step of putting this to fruition and becoming a member of this network? How can we start sharing all this information? And I want your feedback as well as, what do we do from here? We need to encourage our future generations, because they're the ones that are going to take over. They're the ones that are going to keep going and whatnot. So as we said, what are our next steps? And I put it to you today, and hopefully we'll have some discussion as how to do this, how we can make this happen, and go forward. Just a sidebar, being a UCC committee, we are having our next Congress next year. Having these conferences and bringing all of you together is great. Having the conference coming up in next year, we can have a national meeting again and be part of the conference and segue our way into that, have a sidebar of our own archival museum conference, and even start building even more bridges and more facilities and more ideas to function. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Our final speaker for this session is Maryna Chernyavska, and I'm sure many of you have had an opportunity to meet her over the course of this weekend and this seminar, but she is an incredible archivist. Beyond what she does at work, for work, and within the community, she spends a lot of her own time going out to individual organizations, helping them to preserve and share their artifacts, giving advice, working on things, and she never says no, is always willing to help, and is an amazing and incredible resource. Sustainable Ukrainian Canadian Heritage Project, Education Network and Access. In October of 2017, the Cool Folklore Centre at the University of Alberta announced the launch of a program entitled Sustainable Ukrainian Canadian Heritage. The program aims to address critical issues for Ukrainian Canadian communities related to preservation of and access to their historical and cultural heritage. The conference, Ukrainian Archival Collections in Canada Preserving the Past, Building the Future, is the first event within the program. In the broader Canadian society, the value of archival heritage is recognized in certain ways and manifested through various programs and government support through the vibrant Canadian archival community and multiple community archival initiatives at the local level. However, understanding the value of archives and the role of the archivist, especially in the digital age, in Canadian society overall, and in Ukrainian Canadian communities in particular, it's often fragmented and episodic. It often lacks deep appreciation of the archival field, of the specific knowledge of skills of archivists, and most importantly, it often lacks vision. Ukrainian Canadians have been a large and active part of Canadian society since the end of the 19th century, playing a significant role in politics, culture, education, arts, and other aspects of life. Although they have been active contributors to Canadian society for decades, numerous community organizations are at risk of being forgotten or misrepresented by future generations. If the heritage of Ukrainian Canadian institutions is not documented and preserved in archives, there is a great risk that they will be left out of the official historical and cultural discourse in the future. In this presentation, Maryna will talk about the necessity of raising awareness of the importance of archives, of individual and institutional roles in shaping and preserving the collective memory of the society. It will also describe such program and other initiatives of the Cool Folklore Centre that will address these issues. Proszę.
Дякую, Andrea. Thank you. Andrea did the whole introduction for me, so I don't have to go into there. And to start with, I would like to say that I was not trained as an archivist. I did my master's in Ukrainian folklore, and then I went to the library school and I received a degree as a Master of Library and Information Studies. But I identify myself as an archivist for several reasons. First, I love it. Then I had a chance to take Archives Institute that we mentioned yesterday, and many people were excited about, and Rene talked about today as well, and many other workshops offered by the Archives Society of Alberta. I try to read and follow what's happening in the field, and I also have a wonderful opportunity and privilege to work for the Archives Society of Alberta as their online database. Oh my goodness, what's my position?
Database administrator.
Database administrator. Thank you so much. So, being among archivists, talking to archivists, having Irene as a friend and colleague, and other archivists as friends and colleagues, makes me grow all the time, and this is what made me an archivist. And I'm still growing. There is a long way to go. Anyway. We had 3 days of interesting talks, learning experiences, some inspirations. We learned a lot, but what's next? Where do we go from here? And so what? These are the questions that my co-panelists were trying to answer to some extent, and this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to tell you about a project that the Cool Folklore Centre is starting. It's a long-term project, a long-term initiative in the direction that the Cool Folklore Centre is going to, and talk about the different initiatives, hoping to hear your feedback. These are all concrete steps, bear in mind, so I'm offering practical solutions that I hope you find useful. So the first solution that I offer is that we create a network, and we have secured the name, and the suggested title for this project and this network is Sustainable Ukrainian Canadian Heritage Network. Heritage and cultural heritage is a very broad term, and I would like to remind you that at this event, these 3 days, we are focusing exactly on archival heritage. And as Miron started with his keynote 2 days ago, I would like to remind you, archives are unique. They're unique materials that have never been published, and they have permanent value. And this is exactly what we are trying to help different organizations with. So by network, I'm hoping it would be useful. We would like to create a listserv. Rene mentioned 2 listservs that are very widely used by Canadian and Alberta archival community. It's an amazing source of information. It's just an email community, nothing fancy. You subscribe to a list and you get updates regularly on events that are happening. You can reply to the entire list and ask your question if you have a problem, or ask for advice how to better approach whatever project you are starting. So this is the first initiative, and yesterday people seemed to be interested. If you are still interested, we will have a sheet of paper. Please leave your email and we will subscribe you to that list. As I mentioned, the goals of the listserv is for us to stay connected, because we know there were similar initiatives as this conference in the past. We know 15 years ago in Winnipeg there was a meeting, there were other attempts, and after that people left and nothing happened. And the Kulfukla Center, for the reasons I'll mention in the end, is ready to take on the leading role in this and facilitate this list, with the help of many other archivists who identified themselves even during these 3 days, and Irene, who is also excited about this initiative. It's also to inform about relevant news, to share successes, to ask questions, and ask for help. So the next component of this program is education. We are going to offer very practical, hands-on workshops for Ukrainian community archives and archivists who look after those archival collections. And the suggested topics for those workshops are listed here, and it could be anything from how to develop an acquisition policy and actually helping you develop an acquisition policy so that after the day of the workshop you walk away with at least a draft of that policy that you could bring to your board, discuss it with them, and then get approved. Another example is how to describe archives. Rene mentioned that there are professional archival standards that are used in Canada by archivists. So teaching in simple language how to do that. Workshops on privacy and copyright, it's always a very sensitive topic. Of course, digitalization, it's a very sexy topic. Preservation, access, what grants are available. I'm really glad Andrei was presenting just now, because I talked to different representatives of community archives, and many of them were not aware of the heritage program of Shevchenko Foundation. So I thought it was really important that he talks to you, because it's exactly for what you do every day anyways. And many other initiatives. We will be doing a survey and collecting your opinions and learning about your needs, and hope to respond to those. So the next component is resources. And by this I mean, first of all, information resources. And there are tons existing out there. It's hard to keep up with everything that is happening if you're not a professional in that field. But there are many ready-made tools. There are guides for community archives. There are very brief templates and forms and whatnot. There are many resources, and we hope to be able to help you and point to those resources that you have need in. Also developing new information resources, as some of you were talking about the specifics of Ukrainian Canadian heritage, and because we know this field, we hope that we can respond to those specifics. And also sharing resources. One of the examples, and a very practical one, that the Kulfukla Center is offering, we have legacy equipment. When I talk to different archivists, community archivists, they often tell me, oh, we have these, several dozens of VHS. We have no idea what's on them, the content. And there is no way for many institutions to play those assets because there is no equipment. So we have one room in our archives that is called the Digital Lab, and we are hoping to equip it in a way that can be used by other organizations as well. We are happy to share, and we hope that other institutions that maybe also have a piece of equipment that we don't have. We have a reel-to-reel player, we have different players, but not all of them, of course, and they require maintenance, they require professional care and cleaning as much as you use it. But we are hoping that this is something that it's sitting there. We would be happy for you to use it. You would know what's there. And I don't see it happening like on a drop-in basis, but we can talk about, for example, if you all get a summer student, a STEP student is quite an easy money to get from the provincial government, for example. So we could organize a short training session showing your students that are going to work in your organization for the summer, showing them how to digitize your reel-to-reels, and then they could do it for your organization. So things like that. And I think this is all that I was just talking about. And many other questions that we saw popping up over the last 3 days, and I'm sure there's more. This component is one of the biggest. It's an online portal, and the way we see it is we would like, just one step back, you mentioned several times, especially when we had a panel, researcher panel, that it's really hard to understand what Ukrainian archival collections are out there. We know each other here in Alberta, for example, we communicate. I know people in Saskatoon, I know people somewhere else, but it's all based on personal connections more than anything. It would be really nice to have one spot, one hub that would present those institutions that have archival collections. And we are on the very top level. For example, this organization have an abstract about what they are when they started, a very brief description, and then description of their holdings. So we have, I'll be done. For example, we have, 50 different form or collections. They cover these themes. It's 10 linear meters of material, textual records, or whatever you have, so that a researcher or anyone interested in Ukrainian Canadian heritage can come up and see what organization has what. We would also like to have links to those institutional websites or databases if those institutions have databases. For example, if we talk about Kyiv's archives, we would like to have a link to Kyiv's archives that is available online for everyone to use, and similarly with other institutions. However, with those organizations that do not have online catalogs or online databases, we are hoping to develop a model, and we hope it will be sustainable, when different institutions can chip in their resources, financial resources, to maintain a joint database for Ukrainian Canadian archival institutions, and that will be accessible for the general public. Because we talked about this 3 days, that we are here not just to preserve archives, but to make them available, to help people access them. Oh my goodness, of course I had to do that. And it's being recorded, of course, for posterity, to stay in the archives. To me it sounds ambitious. I don't know how about you. It's a lot of work. And these things rarely happen on a volunteer basis. Well, Hristya Kolos can tell us how they do it on a volunteer basis, but usually it doesn't happen on a volunteer basis. There has to be money. There has to be professionals. There has to be dedicated time to do this kind of work. And how is the Kulfukla Center going to do that? Well, aside from some knowledge and skills, that as little as we have, but we do have some, we are lucky to have support from community and certain individuals who help us make this happen. And I would like to announce a new endowment fund that was established at the University of Alberta, called Peter Arabchuk Endowment Fund for the Advancement of Ukrainian-Canadian Heritage Preservation. And I would like to, Peter Arabchuk is here with us today and was here all this conference. I would like you to thank him together with me for his Peter, please identify yourself. Peter Arabchuk has made over $170,000 gift to the University of Alberta to study and document the history and culture of Ukrainian Canadians defined broadly, including those people sometimes thought of as marginal to the Ukrainian Canadian experience, and support the Ukrainian Canadian archives and cultural heritage collections. So this, Peter's help, Peter's support gives me confidence in that this is going to have a continuation. This third day is not the last day for us, and I hope we will be able to continue doing the wonderful things we are doing. And thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
I'd like to just take a moment and thank all of our speakers, Rene, Andriy, Lydia, Maryna. It's quite amazing to actually hear about all of the different systems we have in place to maintain and share the archives that we have. So at this time, if anyone has any questions, we'll take them. What is it? Can I just grab some? Sure. I'll leave this one with you.
Just a quick question to Lydia.
Don't stand in front.
Where is the next Congress next year?
Ottawa.
Ottawa? Okay. Then my bigger question is to Andriy. So over the last 3 days, occasionally we've commented on the fact that our information in Canada is shared with those in Ukraine and back and forth. And Andriy made a point that a lot of the funds go for Ukrainian Canadian programming. But I was wondering if you have discussed within the Shevchenko Foundation diasporic interaction, because we're actually a huge global community, Ukrainians. So is the Shevchenko Foundation addressing anything that way as far as connecting not only with Ukraine, but sharing information, archives, digital network around the world?
Okay, I'm directionally challenged today. Yeah, interesting. Paul Grod, who's the current president and outgoing president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, and I spent a fair bit of time over the last year looking at, I'm going to say, recreating the Shevchenko Foundation in other diasporas. For instance, I had an opportunity to meet last year in both Portugal and in Spain with their communities. Some of those communities are very neophyte when it comes to anything to do with maintenance of their, when people are truck drivers for 18 hours a day, there's not a lot of time to have a lot of volunteer commitment the way we have here in Canada. I think it's important to understand that the Foundation wants to work with the World Congress in developing, using our template of our foundation here, elsewhere in the world. So I think that discussion is moving forward. That's going to take bucks to be able to do. A good part of my time is spent, although there are a lot of donors that know you people exist, they don't really know a lot of you individually. And so on your behalf, I say, we'd like a whole bunch of money for these people, for whatever they do. And I can tell you that this issue, the wonderful SUCH network that's being developed, is catching the attention of other donors. I also think it has quite an interesting international potential on that side as well. So I would say we're only starting, so much of the Ukrainian community in the world, diaspora, is about bullets for Ukraine. And Ukraine has been fighting this sort of war to the death now for many centuries. But our diaspora gets distracted, and a lot of our resources go to that fight. And so some of these other things at the international level are thought of as being sort of extras or things that are nice to have, but not needs that we have. And I think Canada is a leader in showing, no, it is a need to have. You strengthen your culture. You can actually help Ukraine by being an influential group within your own country, celebrating things Ukrainian and having influence on government because you matter, and you matter to other people. And then government thinks, maybe we should talk to you when we deal with the geopolitics of the world. And so, big, huge question. But I would say that eventually will be on his way out, has made a commitment to moving forward with sort of a foundation like the Shevchenko Foundation. Certainly Paul, who's wanting to be one of the incoming World Congress presidents, has also made that commitment as well.
Yeah, because I've just seen the connection going through our archives, how our whole world diaspora community is connected through letters, especially with our Love Letter project. And it's nice to see that there will be ongoing support to connect all of us. Yeah.
Hi, I'd like to.
Hi, I'd just like to say that I really enjoyed these last 2 days. I got to learn about all of these wonderful archives and the holdings that they have here, and I'm very, very impressed. And my question is actually for Rene. One of the things that, as Maryna said, we wanted to actually be able to give tangible things to some of our smaller organizations, and I really appreciate that Rene has kind of come and brought, some sources that you'll be able to go to that some of you may not know about. And I was just wondering how many of the smaller archives here are members of ASA. Is there a lot of you that are already members? So I think she's provided some more tangible stuff for you to look at, and that's just kind of what I wanted to remark on. That was one of the plans, so that we learn about each other, but we find something tangible you could actually use. And I think the follow-up with the workshops is where you'll really get some usable information. Thank you.
Ashley.
So the question has come up over these 3 days, like what next? How do we engage with future generations? And I think that's really where like the Young Canada Works funding can come in, because that's when you're going to engage people, the young people, and get them interested. I started off in a completely unrelated field, and through employment at the Ukrainian Museum of Canada, that's how I got into Ukrainian studies and into Ukrainian archives, Ukrainian museums, that sort of thing. So really utilizing that Young Canada Works funding and bringing students in and showing them what there is that they can get into is really how you'll engage those future generations.
Personally, I'm very excited about what's going on with this conference, about Peters Endowment, about the network that has been created. Thank you, Maryna, for your leadership moving this forward. Just a quick suggestion about something that we can do already right now. There are several practicing archivists over here in the room, and I talked to some of them. We can create an advisory group for Ukrainian institutions, and through the email, so that people who have specific issues or problems they would need advice, so they can email to several of us, including Maron and Irene, myself, James, Maryna, and then we can answer, like several of us can probably contribute at the same time, so that the answer or scenario is more substantial. So we can do it right now. I would be very happy to help. So my email, my phone number will be on the list. So if you have some issues, just please email me. I'll be glad to help, and I'm sure others will be glad too. So there is something that we can do right now and to provide this advisory services for institutions and people.
And
thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I am the archives advisor, so please contact me. If my stats go up exponentially, maybe it leads to more funding for archives generally in the future, so please contact me. And This network is specifically to help direct to the right person, because if you have a preservation question, we know there is wonderful Allison at the Provincial Archives of Alberta who never refuses to help with a concrete question. Or if there is something that we don't know, we can always ask Rene, and she will redirect to someone because she's very well connected. So we just need, there are answers and tools out there. We need to know about them instead of inventing a wheel.
I'd also like to thank Peter for his gesture and his endowment, and Maryna and others of the organizing committee for this event. It truly is an important event, and I'm personally very excited about it and support it. A couple of things, though, I'd like to say that I value very much the ideas of a digital network and volunteer advice from professional archivists, but I do think that there has to be a more substantial framework put together. In particular, drawing on the recommendations of the Cool Congress, it seems to me there's room in Canada for a national network of Ukrainian Canadian archives.
We are talking national. Such network is a national. We have people here from different provinces.
Indeed, but what I'm getting at is that there needs to be a legal entity in the sense where people not only see each other digitally, they see each other face to face on a regular basis. So the beauty of this conference, I think, is that we have actual centers from across Canada. And it seems to me that there needs to be some kind of larger plan that allows the network to operate on a daily, weekly basis, yearly, in and out. Now, from my perspective, it's not accidental that this initiative has come from the University of Alberta, where we have both the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies and the Cool Folklore Center. And it seems to me that with the students you have taking programs here, the kind of example that was just described here by Ashley could be repeated over and over. We need to create opportunities for young people, jobs, summer jobs. And one way to do that is simply for a network of institutions to get together, chip in an annual membership fee, be a registered society. In Alberta, have casinos, because that's one of the things we can do in Alberta that perhaps other provinces can't do as well. And to have a part-time employee for this network work here at the University of Alberta. Perhaps it's jointly with CIUS and the Canadian Cool Folklore Center, so that we can provide a part-time job to one of your graduate students who then will be at the heart of this national communication network. So in addition to digital communication, which is very important, there actually have to be people who can travel across Canada, who can meet in seminars and workshops, who can produce a handbook that would advise local community archives and museums in smaller locations across Canada in a very practical face-to-face interaction. It needs to be a living network, not simply an electronic one. But anyway, that's, as I say, I welcome the initiative, but I hope in our future discussions we can maybe stretch ourselves a little bit to see the possibility of establishing a network of the kind that the Congress resolution was calling for, particularly in archives. I don't see us doing libraries and performing arts groups and all of these things all at once at a very high point. Just in the field of archives alone, if we could have a part-time employee in the national network, I think would be a lot for doing that.
Thank you, Rene. Your comments are always greatly appreciated. The workshops, the educational component that I was trying, and I had only 15 minutes, so I couldn't go much into detail. The workshops will be face-to-face, and we will be attracting professionals in their field, in their respective area of archives,
to teach those workshops. This is a big country. As much as I would love all of us to gather here every year, I don't think it's possible. Nobody travels to Edmonton that often, unfortunately. But it's 21st century, so we have to use the best of what we have. No matter how big money we have, it disappears very fast if you pay for people to come to travel to a certain destination. So my personal preference would be to spend it to create something tangible, as you're saying, a guide, or to teach people do things, to gain certain skills, rather than come and talk. I was really pushing for actually having this conference first before doing any practical steps, because it is important for us to talk first. It is important for us to understand where we stand, to understand what needs we have and what challenges we face. So this is why we started with something that some of you might have found more theoretical maybe in some cases, but this is important. This is why we are doing that. The following steps will be practical, and we are hoping to have a first workshop hopefully in the fall, if not in the spring of the following year. So I'm really happy that there's so much excitement about this initiative. I already see people who are ready to work with it, including from CIUS and other archival institutions. I hope Maryna can join us. And I hope this has a future.
Maryna, I'm sorry, we are just about out of time.
Can we ask Myra to comment, actually?
Sure.
Modesta Maryna.
He's retired.
Well, he's trying to retire. For 12 years now.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this conference. I haven't attended this kind of a conference for a long time, and it's good to see so many Ukrainian archivists, people involved in archives here together. As far as recommendations go, what I'm suggesting is those who are here today and participated in the sessions, when you go back to your hometowns and archives, to sit down and think through some of the discussions here, and write down your thoughts and ideas on where we go from here. And I recommend that maybe we could send it to Maryna, and that she can probably, pardon?
We will be sending out a survey
after
the conference, so please do share your thoughts.
But I would suggest maybe in form of a narrative, discussion. And perhaps this can be sort of combined and produced as some kind of a report. Also, the suggestion about sending in emails and phone numbers, I think is a very good idea to get the ball rolling before some kind of a structure is put together. Even though I'm retired, I still get inquiries from all over, people come and visit the archives and they want to know their family history in 15 minutes. They contact Myra and he's going to get it for you. Or even people, who are dealing with estates. People pass away and they leave libraries, archival artwork, for example. A big problem is trying to put monetary value on Ukrainian artwork for estate purposes. We need experts like that, we have to, and this is, we can't have experts all across Canada, but there are people who know, and we want to know who these people are. We have, for example, people like Andrew Gregorowicz in Toronto, who's a librarian from way back, and knows the community inside out. He can be called upon to talk about library work. Same with archival work, there are people who have retired, like myself, but are still involved. And they could be called on to help out. Basically, what some people want is just to talk to somebody. Shorobete, and photographs. Very simple piece of information. You have a photograph, identify it. A photograph that's not identified is useless. So there's no point bringing this to an archive in a shoebox and leaving it there. So it's little simple things like that. A lot of it is common sense. So this is what I'm suggesting, is that perhaps people who want to can contact Maryna, leave their emails and maybe a short description of what they are interested in, because we have archivists who are, let's say, specialize in the pioneer period. Others specialize in church architecture. There's a fellow in Ottawa, Slavko Demchinsky, who's uttered several thousand photographs of churches. And every summer he goes out west and he photographs churches, specializing in derelict and abandoned churches, Now he's going through southern Ontario. These kinds of people who can, provide information, help out, whatever. The other thing that I want to bring to your attention, and this was mentioned just earlier, is this whole question of diaspora. Now there are institutions in Ukraine who have discovered the diaspora, and they are sending out appeals, and they're sending out people to do tours of our communities here. And they're asking, of course, for financial support for very worthy causes, like the whole of the More, whatever. But they're also asking for archival material. Okay, now what do? Who do you check with to find out that these are legitimate organizations? Are they government related? Are they involved with the government, or are they basically entrepreneurs? So you have to contact somebody and find out. If somebody phones you, somebody contacts you. I'm from Ukraine and I want your stuff. Is this a legitimate? Who do you contact to find out? But this is the kind of information that I'm talking about. Anyways, I'm going to be here for a little while longer, so if you have any particular questions, please, I'll be very glad to answer them. Gabriel.
And on that note, I think we will make this a wrap. It's really quite fascinating in all the different aspects, and something actually Andriy said, how so many people engage into Ukrainian things through the arts, through the archives, through their family stories, and whether they are actively involved in the Ukrainian community or they go beyond the community but have an affiliation and a real keen interest. These are all really important aspects. So with all of the suggestions that were made here this afternoon, please do share those insights with Maryna. She's got a fantastic project on the way. We have the beginnings of fundings, thanks to Mr. Radchik, to be able to get the digital portal going, and always looking for more support. At this point in time, I would...
For archival purposes, can we do a group photo?
We can. I'm not quite done yet. At this point, I really would like to invite up the directors of the Cool Folklore Center and the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, Yelena Pogosyan and Miroslan, please.
So, dear colleagues, it is my pleasure to announce the long list of people and organizations without whom this conference would not be possible. First of all, to have a conference and a successful conference, you need a brave, bright, and creative team. So, our organizing committee, we had two chairs, Maryna Chernyavska and Rene Georgopalis. Even my Slavic background is not helping here, sorry, but also Alexander Pankeev, Lenin Pauluk, and Victoria Yakovleva. And for moral support, we decided to keep me and Yars as committee members, but we really didn't do much as good administrators. I would like also to thank our volunteers. Natalia Bezborodova, Eric Finchman, Liliana Gultsev, Ashley Halko Adli, Katerina Kot, Ksenia Marinyak, Peter Milnicki, and Michelle Tracy. Thank you very much. Let's stand. To have a successful conference, you also need not only moral support, but financial support. Let me read the long list of our partners. And I would like to point out that this conference was supported by government-funded organizations, by academia, and by community. And it shows that it's important on all these levels. So we were very honored to be supported by Ukrainian Canadian Foundation of Taras Shevchenko, Faculty of Arts, Archives Society of Alberta, Provincial Archives of Alberta, Friends of Provincial Archives of Alberta Society, Alberta Ukrainian Commemorative Society, Alberta Ukrainian Heritage Foundation, and Alberta Contact. Thank you, our dear sponsors. And to finish my comments, I am very proud that the Kyiv Folklore Center is attempting to put together this program, the such program, and take over this role of leaders in archiving and in preserving Ukrainian heritage in Canada, but it also a huge responsibility, and we would be happy to be partners with everybody here, and only as a group we can take over conquer this project. So, and I believe this conference was a success. So thank you to all of you for participating.
I just want to say special thanks from the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies to Maryna Chernyavska, who really spearheaded this whole initiative, and for all her work she's been doing to help preserve Ukrainian Canadian archives. It's wonderful to preserve archives. A lot of people use them for scholars. They're the lifeblood of research. Very often you go in and you make use of them. Primary sources are really, really important. And the material preserved in the archives are absolutely essential for good quality archival or scholarly work. There are serious implications to archives as well. I mean, it's great that genealogists use them for their purposes, and authors use them when they're researching a novel or something. They might want to get some context and feel of an era or a period or an individual. But they have political consequences, and you see this especially now at a time when there's so much disinformation swirling around the world. And to counter this disinformation, you need facts and you need documents. Hladyshevsky, of course, was involved in the long campaign to get the government to recognize and the Canadian society to recognize the fact of the internment. Without documents, it's a real uphill battle. You just can't rely on memories and a few things here and there. And the documentary record around the internment keeps growing. And you heard the presentation, the excellent presentation by Mark Minenko, highlighting the kinds of things you find in police archives and law court archives and things like that haven't even been, they are now being fed into this discussion. So the documentary record is being really, really enhanced with the collections that we're accessing. You also have in Eastern Europe in particular, a real problem that, revisionist histories and things like that. And without those documents about the famine that are preserved here, about various political movements and things like that, you are leaving yourself vulnerable to have your heritage misrepresented by others with a political agenda. So something just to keep in mind about the importance of the work of the archives, that these documents, and you never know how something's going to be valuable. Something will get deposited, and it could be 50 or 100 years later, somebody's going to come along and say, "My God, this is absolutely, here it is in black and white," and will prove a point or a case. I want to make one announcement. We took advantage of the fact that one of the people presenting at the conference was Olya or Alexandra Natyuk, who's here from Ukraine. She's actually a member of the diaspora raised in Poland, and she is going to be giving a talk at the university in Pembina Hall, room 358. That's the third floor. The Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies on the fourth floor. It's an Asian studies. Don't worry, just get off the elevator or up the stairs and go north or left and down to the end of the hall. And she'll be talking on contemporary Polish-Ukrainian relations between conflict and reconciliation. A very, very current topic given what's going on in Poland, given the troubles that Ukraine is facing as well. So please join us for her presentation tomorrow. And last but not least, what? Oh, 3:45 in the afternoon. Last but not least, I want to thank all of you for your participation. Part of what makes this conference so successful, I think, is the mix of people we have. We have people who are institutional people, we have academic people, we have amateurs, volunteers, we have community people, and each one brings a certain perspective to the discussion. And you've certainly enriched it by your presence here today. So thank you for investing the time and energy to be a part of it. Thanks.
And for last but not least, I think we all need to thank Lenin for organizing this conference and taking care of all our needs. Thank you, Lenin. You are a real trooper.
Yeah, that's it. You're free. And those...
Group photo.
Yes, group photo. And then those who are going to the village for the tour, please gather next to the Rutherford House, the same place where we went to the provincial archives from. And there will be a minibus, silver, I think, right? Minibus. You'll see there will be one probably. And we will leave from there at 1 o'clock, hopefully. Thank you.
Where are we doing the picture?
Thanks again.
Дуже дякую.
Wonderful work.